The fishing vessel cut through the glassy surface of the Arctic Ocean, its hull slicing through the water with a quiet grace. The sun, a pale disk in the endless blue, cast long, dancing shadows across the deck, creating a mesmerizing pattern that seemed almost hypnotic. A seasoned crew of 5 led by Captain Lars basked in the unusual warmth, their faces weathered by years of battling the elements. Each wrinkle and scar told a story of survival and resilience. They were miles from shore, their nets cast wide, hoping for a bountiful haul. The sea, generous on some days and stingy on others, held its secrets beneath the surface. The air was still, the silence broken only by the gentle sloshing of the waves against the hull. It was a serene symphony, a rare moment of peace in the often tumultuous Arctic. It was a day like any other, or so they thought. The day was so calm, in fact, that it lulled the crew into a false sense of security, a deceptive tranquility that masked the Arctic's true nature. The Arctic was known for its unpredictable nature, its sudden storms and treacherous ice flows. It was a place where the weather could change in an instant, turning from calm to chaos without warning. But on this day, it seemed almost inviting, the gentle rocking of the boat lulling some of the younger crew members into a peaceful sleep. They dreamed of home, of loved ones, unaware of the looming danger. Little did they know that their tranquility was about to be shattered. The Arctic, with its serene facade, was merely biding its time. Lars, ever the vigilant captain, scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowed against the glare of the sun reflecting off the water. He had seen a lot in his years at sea, but something about the stillness of the day, the almost unnatural calmness, unsettled him. It was as if the Arctic itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The stillness was eerie, a quiet before the storm that Lars had learned to recognize. And then he saw it, a shape in the distance, a white smudge against the endless blue. It was barely perceptible at first, a ghostly apparition on the horizon. Lars grabbed his binoculars from the bridge, the rubber grips warm from the sun, and raised them to his eyes. He adjusted the focus, his breath catching in his throat as the smudge resolved itself into something far more substantial, far more ominous. An iceberg larger than any he had ever seen before was drifting slowly towards them. It was a silent giant, moving with a deceptive grace that belied its destructive potential. It rose from the water like a jagged white mountain, its peaks lost in the low-hanging clouds. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a reminder of nature's raw power. The crew, now alerted by Lars's tense demeanor, gathered on the deck, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. They had heard stories of icebergs, but seeing one up close was a different experience altogether. The calm before the storm was over. The Arctic had revealed its hand, and the crew knew they were in for a battle against the elements. The iceberg was a harbinger of the challenges to come, a test of their skill and endurance. "Iceberg ahead!" Lars bellowed, his voice sharp, cutting through the lazy calm that had settled over the crew. His shout was like a jolt of electricity, snapping everyone to attention. The men, startled from their reverie, scrambled to their feet, eyes wide with apprehension. They had been lulled into a false sense of security by the gentle rocking of the boat and the monotonous rhythm of the waves. They had all seen icebergs before, of course, but something about this one, its sheer size, the way it seemed to loom over them, sent shivers down their spines. It was as if the iceberg had a presence, a silent, menacing aura that demanded their attention. Wordlessly they gathered at the railing, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and unease. The air was thick with tension, each man lost in his own thoughts, contemplating the enormity of the icy giant before them. The iceberg was indeed colossal, a monolith of ice that seemed to stretch endlessly towards the horizon. It was a stark reminder of nature's raw power, a force that could not be tamed or controlled. It dwarfed their little vessel, making them feel insignificant, vulnerable. The boat, which had been their sturdy companion through many voyages, now seemed like a fragile speck in the face of this icy behemoth. The sun glinted off its jagged peaks, casting eerie, dancing shadows across its surface. The play of light and shadow gave the iceberg an almost otherworldly appearance, as if it were a ghostly sentinel from another realm. "Never seen one that big," muttered Ben, the youngest of the crew, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, the iceberg's enormity leaving him almost speechless. He had only been fishing with Lars for a few months, and the Arctic still held a sense of awe and terror for him. Each trip was an adventure filled with the unknown and the unpredictable. He had heard stories, whispered tales of giant icebergs that could crush a ship like theirs with ease, and of strange, unexplained occurrences in their vicinity. These stories, passed down from seasoned sailors, had always seemed like myths, until now. Lars, his weathered face grim, kept his eyes glued to the iceberg. He had seen many things in his years at sea, but this iceberg was unlike any he had encountered before. He knew that beauty could be deceiving, especially in the Arctic. The serene, majestic appearance of the iceberg belied the danger it posed. Icebergs were unpredictable, their movements dictated by unseen currents and the vagaries of the wind. A sudden shift could spell disaster for any vessel caught in its path, and this one, this behemoth of ice, felt different somehow, as if it held a dark, silent power. It was a reminder of the Arctic's unforgiving nature, a place where beauty and danger walked hand in hand. As they drew closer, an unsettling silence descended upon the vessel. The usual hum of the engine seemed to be swallowed by the icy expanse, leaving only the faintest whisper of the wind. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull seemed to fade, replaced by an almost deafening quiet. It was as if the ocean itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Even the cries of the gulls, usually a constant soundtrack to their days at sea, were absent. The sky, typically alive with their calls, was eerily silent, adding to the growing sense of unease. It was as if the iceberg itself was sucking the sound from the air, creating an eerie, almost sacred space around it. The massive structure loomed ahead, its icy surface glistening under the pale sunlight, casting long shadows over the water. The crew huddled together, their initial awe replaced by a growing sense of unease. They exchanged nervous glances, each man feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on them. The iceberg, now looming large before them, seemed to radiate an almost palpable coldness, a chill that seeped into their bones despite the warm sunshine. The contrast between the bright day and the icy monolith was jarring, unsettling their senses. The air grew heavy, making it difficult to breathe, as if a weight had settled upon their chests. A thick fog began to roll in, further obscuring their view and adding to the oppressive atmosphere. "Captain, something ain't right," whispered Olaf, the first mate, his voice husky with apprehension. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of danger in the mist. He had been sailing with Lars for over a decade and had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, his instincts were screaming at him to turn the ship around and flee. The unease in his gut was unlike anything he had felt before. Lars nodded, his jaw set in a hard line. He could feel the tension in the air, a tangible force that seemed to grip the entire crew. His mind raced with thoughts of what could be causing this unnatural silence. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he too felt a growing sense of dread. The iceberg, with its towering presence, seemed almost alive, as if it were watching them, waiting for them to make a move. He had encountered his fair share of danger in his years at sea, but there was something about this iceberg, something about the unnatural silence that surrounded it, that sent shivers down his spine. It was a silence that spoke of hidden threats and unseen perils. He knew they should turn back, that curiosity could be a dangerous thing, but something drew him closer, an irresistible pull towards the icy giant. The mystery of the iceberg was too compelling to ignore, even as every instinct screamed to flee. Lars squinted at the iceberg, his eyes drawn to a particular point near its base. Something glinted in the pale sunlight, a flash of something out of place amidst the blinding white of the ice. It was a subtle thing, easily missed if one wasn't looking for it, but Lars had spent a lifetime reading the subtle signs of the sea, and this was something different. "What is that?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling slightly. He had seen it too, the flicker of something unnatural amidst the ice. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, and it filled him with a primal fear, a deep-seated unease that sent shivers down his spine. "I don't know," Lars murmured, more to himself than to the crew. He reached for his binoculars again, bringing the strange glint into focus. It was definitely metal, of that he was sure, but its shape remained elusive, obscured by the shifting shadows and the glare of the sun. It looked almost like... No, it couldn't be, could it? "Get us closer, Olaf," Lars ordered, his voice firm despite the tremor of fear that ran through him. He had to see it more clearly, had to know what they were dealing with. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but they obeyed without question. They trusted Lars even if their instincts screamed at them to turn and flee. The Leviathan crept closer to the iceberg, its engine idling softly. The crew, their faces pale with apprehension, watched as the strange metallic glint grew larger, resolving itself into a shape that was both familiar and utterly alien in this frozen wasteland. It was a ship, or at least, it had once been a ship. It was a large vessel, far larger than their own, its once proud hull now crushed and mangled, encased in the icy grip of the iceberg. The metal was twisted and torn, the decks buckled and broken as if some unimaginable force had squeezed the life out of it. It was a scene of utter devastation, a silent testament to the raw power of nature. "Sweet Mary, Mother of God," breathed Marco, his hand instinctively reaching for the crucifix he wore around his neck. He had seen his fair share of storms, had witnessed the destructive fury of the sea firsthand, but this was something else entirely. It was as if the iceberg itself had reached out and crushed the ship, its icy grip unrelenting. Even Lars, a man who had seen more than his fair share of death and destruction, felt a chill run down his spine. The wrecked ship, frozen in its icy tomb, seemed to whisper of a terror beyond human comprehension. What kind of storm, what kind of force, could inflict such damage? And what had become of its crew?